So I'm always on the lookout for new and interesting lenses to use with my Sony cameras. And recently a company called Zongi, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it, sent over this set of cinema primes. And they have a couple of really interesting features. So first off, a quick disclaimer, obviously Zongi did send me over these lenses, but they sent me over these lenses to test and see what I thought about them. I did not get paid, there was no compensation, this isn't sponsored, they just sent them to me for free. So take that as you will. I hope that I'm able to give a relatively unbiased opinion. There's a lot of things about these lenses I like, and there's a few things that I don't. So first off, a couple of things about the lens set. Okay, so they've got three lenses, a 20mm, a 35mm, and a 50mm. And an interesting thing about these lenses is that they open up to a super fast aperture of t1.0, which is an incredibly fast aperture. Now when we talk about apertures being fast or slow, basically what we're talking about is how wide and how much light the aperture allows to pass through the lens. The lower the number, the more light that can pass through the lens. So this is a t1.0. Traditionally, an f1.4, f1.8 lens was typically considered a fast lens, and t1.0 is a huge jump ahead of t1.4 or 1.8, something like that. So for reference, this would be a t1.8, and that is t1.0. It's kind of hard to tell there, but t1.8, t1.0. So it lets a whole lot more light through the lens than a lot of other lenses that manufacturers have been making. So typically to find a lens that opens up this wide, you're looking at something that costs thousands and thousands of dollars, especially in a cinema housing like this. Now these lenses only cost $500 each, or you can buy them as a full set for $12.99. Whenever they sent me the full set, it did come with a hard case. I'm not sure if that's what happens with a regular purchase. I hope it is. They sent over this hard case, which is great. It holds the three lenses very well. So in the case, it's got space for the three lenses. Each lens position is marked there, and the 20, the 50, and the 35. So what it means whenever we talk about this as cinema lenses are a couple of things. So first off, they're fully manual and they're fully metal. Okay, so the build quality is going to be very different from a traditional photo lens. So it's all metal. It's got these metal gears on it. That's for attaching focusing systems. And there is no auto systems in this at all. No, your camera cannot detect what aperture it's at. There is no autofocus. There's no electrical connections at all on these lenses, which is kind of typical with cinema lenses. And the other thing is, it is measured in t-stops, not f-stops. So with a photography lens, you're going to talk about f1.8 or f2.8 for zooms, stuff like that. These are t-stops, so t1.0. The main difference there is that it's a more accurate reading of the amount of light passing through the lens. It is the transmission level of light that is able to get from one end of the lens onto the camera sensor. And in theory, it should be the same across all lenses from all manufacturers. That's kind of the theory. Sometimes they don't get it right though. This sort of image style that you can get with something like a t1.0, even if you close it down, you can really get a cool looking image with these lenses because they have a very vintage feel to them. And that's kind of like a trendy thing these days, right, is to have a vintage feel to a camera lens. I think they provide that vintage look very well. So I'm going to show you a sharpness test. I just stuck the camera on a tripod. I didn't move the camera. I didn't move the thing that it was focused on, so you'll see a difference in field of view, obviously. And I set all of them to focus on the color checker, and we'll zoom in and out just so that you can see the sharpness test. So at t1.0, you'll notice that the background blur is crazy. It's beautiful. I think it looks really nice and creamy and fluffy. The bokeh is not distracting in any way. But you'll notice sharpness is not great, right? It's not clinically tack sharp, and that's kind of important just to remember. But as we stop down to T2 or T4, sharpness increases dramatically, and then obviously once you get down to something like T8, it's incredibly sharp when you zoom in. And again, we're looking at something 300 or 400% zoom, so at that point, sharpness is just fine. If you're wanting lenses that open to t1.0 that are clinically sharp, wide open, I mean, you're spending a huge amount of money. So I don't think it's fair to expect that from these lenses, but it's worth knowing sharpness is not perfect at t1.0. Overall though, I think it does do a pretty good job. Now another thing that I hope you notice across these lenses is that colors are incredibly similar. And that's really important, right? Because if you're filming a narrative piece and you've dialed in all of your settings and you swap to another lens, you're going to want to make sure that the image quality and the colors of that image, the contrast levels, all those kinds of things match across all your lenses. That way you don't need to color grade each lens individually. You can just add an adjustment layer, throw your edit on there, and it should work work across all lenses. And that's really important. Other cheap lenses have typically found a problem with that. They're just not consistent across the board. And I find that these actually were very consistent, which is a huge plus to these lenses. As for the downsides to these lenses, there's only a couple of things that I don't really like about them, and honestly, they're quite minor. So again, we're just as a reminder, we're talking about full cinema lenses opening up to T1.0 for under $500 when you buy them as a set. So take these criticisms with that in mind, because I think they are fair at that price point. So to start off, honestly, my main complaint, which is very minor, but my main complaint is these lens caps. Okay, so these lens caps are plastic, and they feel kind of cheap, and there's no felt or soft material on the inside. So when you put them on or off the lenses, it just feels very cheap, and especially this one on the 35, it just comes off super easily. So whenever you have it in your camera bag, if you're lifting this out of a camera bag, this is just going to come off with it. So just something to be aware of. It'd be nice if they could just add a tiny bit of felt on the inside of these lenses, these lens caps, and that way it would have a bit more friction to stick to it and not feel like I'm potentially going to scrape the outside of the barrel of the lens. So not the end of the world, but you know, an easy fix in my opinion. Now, most of the time I was using these, I used them with an ND filter from Freewell, and they come with magnetic lens caps. At that point it was a moot point because I didn't really ever use these. I used the magnetic ones on the Freewell filters. And secondly, the only other thing is the focus and iris rings are good, they're just not excellent. Okay, so they're smooth and they're consistent, but and the focus ring has a great throw to it, big long throw, which is nice for dialing in your focus, but they're just not super well lubricated out. I don't think there's a little bit of a metal on metal feel. In fact, you can probably hear it. It's just a little bit more rough than I wanted to feel. I mean, it's really not that bad, but I've used other lenses that do feel nicer, so I thought I'd bring it up. But when we're talking about lenses that are sort of between $400 and $500, for the quality and the uniqueness that you can get with these sorts of lenses, I don't think we can complain too much. Now, the kind of footage you can get from these I think is really fun, right? They've got a very nice vintage look to the footage. Obviously, T1.0, it's very hard to get things perfectly in focus, but when you're using something like this and you're filming at T1.0, you're wanting to get a specific look, right? You're not going to use these at T1.0 all the time. You're going to use these whenever you want that dreamy, magical kind of look to your footage. These would be great for filming things like dream sequences or something a little bit more narrative and creative. I also did use these for a wedding, and I found that they were a lot of fun to use for a wedding, especially for the portrait section, because you were able to give it that sort of magical feel. And a lot of people are going to want a sort of more magical look to their wedding video whenever they want to try and remember, looking back on it a few years down the line, be able to remember it as this magical, wonderful occasion. This sort of image style that you can get with something like a T1.0, even if you close it down, you can really get a cool looking image with these lenses because they have a very vintage feel to them. So I'm going to play a bunch of footage that I took while we were traveling in Ireland and in France. I took the 20mm with me. I only took the one because I didn't have much space in my bag, so I took one lens because 20mm is pretty wide for a T1.0. You know, it's a 30mm equivalent, which is great for just sort of street run and gun style stuff. I don't do a whole lot of run and gun stuff except for YouTube B-roll, because usually I prefer to work in a studio where I can dial in all my lighting and do all that kind of stuff. But I thought I'd take these out, give them a go, and see what kind of footage I could get. And overall, I think it has a really pleasing image. It definitely reminds me of some vintage lenses, the Helios style and stuff like that, except in a far better housing, and gives you that incredible background blur. Now, if you're wanting to film everything in T1.0, you're going to need an ND filter because the amount of light that can get through that lens is crazy. It really does let a whole lot of light in. I had to use my 6 to 9 stop ND filter for most of this. Even on cloudy days, it needed a pretty substantial amount of ND filter, which is good, you know, because that means whenever you are filming in the dark, you could take the ND filter off, let all this light in, and you're really not going to have to bump up that ISO, which is a good thing because the more you increase your ISO, typically the more noise you're going to introduce to your footage. So the more light you can enter into your camera naturally without having to digitally brighten it with your ISO, the better your low light image is going to be. So overall, I think these are a lot of fun, right? They provide a unique and fun image for a decent price. Now, I don't think these are designed for getting that clinically sharp sort of commercial style footage. If you're wanting to film commercials and you're wanting to get sharp, clean images, you're gonna have to probably spend more money and get lenses that just have that style to them, ones that are designed to be sharp and contrasty and clean. But if you're wanting something a little more interesting, a little more unique, and something that is probably more ideal for narrative work, for music videos, for maybe weddings, if you're willing to work with manual focus, those sorts of things, I think these excel really well. Obviously, one of the challenges with T1.0 is getting anything in focus is pretty tough. So I definitely encourage you, not only do you need an ND filter, you probably need an external monitor with focus assist features that'll hopefully help you nail focus. Now, I use these on my ZV-E10 and I did use them in a pretty beefy cinema rig setup. So if you're interested in my new Mark II of my ZV-E10 cinema rig, make sure to subscribe because I use these lenses in that rig, and I love it. It's beautiful. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed the video, hit the like button, drop a comment down below. I'm really interested to know what you think about this style of lens. It seems very popular right now to produce these super fast lenses. I want to know what you think. Hit the subscribe button so that we can continue to build this channel. I really appreciate all of you for doing so, and I hope you have a wonderful day.